That was a prediction from Hasu a while ago. He said like the public mempool will dry up. It might be a little bit clickbaiting, but it's definitely becoming true. That it's like so obvious is that the dystopia is happening. That a few players, they're like mafia basically. They're getting access to MEV at each layer.
Welcome to a new episode of When Building. I'm your host, Stephanie. When Building is supported by Untitled Labs, a Web3 developer community dedicated to push the boundaries of crypto space. This will be my third MEV themed episode, and I'm so happy to have Danny, a data scientist from Flashbots, to be our guest. I guess I don't need to tell how Flashbots shed light on the dark forest zone and how it shapes our understanding of MEV. So let's kick off today's discussion with the person working at the forefront of MEV mitigation and see what's happening out there. Hi, Danny. Can you share your Web3 story with us? Let us get to know about you and what you do in Flashbots.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Stephanie. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Danny. I'm a data scientist at Flashbots right now, currently. Before this, I was a data scientist at ZeroX Protocol, which is basically a DEX trading platform. So from there, I was analyzing the data about like DEX volume and how users experience like really suck from the slippage, which basically is tied to MEV activities. And that's how like it tied to my journey to Flashbots today. Yeah, and speaking of how what Flashbots that do today, before Ethereum stepped into the merge, Flashbots was building this tool called MEV Get, where basically they're allowing any POW miners to connect it and basically pass the MEV transactions through the tool. And after PBS or basically merge, all the miners step towards the validator side, and we have how to say proposer builder separation. And so Flashbots had this tool called MEV Boost, which is basically implementation of PBS, and which is being used by all the Ethereum validators. I would say around like 93% as an adoption. That's generally what's being, how to say, known by people about Flashbots. We also have other products, including Flashbot Protect, or you could call it MEV Share in terms of its order flow auction functionality, where any person, any user on Ethereum, they can use the RPC to send their transactions. So to go to our private mempool, and potentially being searched by searcher to get some refunds from the background that we allow them to do on top of the user transactions. We also run a relay, and we're also building this big vision, how to say, product called Suave, which potentially would be, decentralizing all the MEV activities and like potentially put everything into a transparent mechanism, and so to avoid the dystopia that we're pretty actually kind of seeing today. So that's a rant about everything we do.
Okay, thanks for the introduction. To lay a background for our later discussions, I would like Danny to walk us through the MEV supply chain, like what roles or components are involved, what they do, how they interact with one another, and how they make a profit.
Yeah. So the MEV supply chain as a concept is basically, if you would imagine a diagram from left to right, if we trying to put all the rows or players in the ecosystem today, it starts with the user, just like you and me, whoever want to interact with Ethereum, and potentially the major activity today that's leaking MEV would be, say, DEX swap. And so once you want to like interact with Ethereum, the user will submit a transaction through their wallet. So here, wallet provider is also another role that has a pretty big say in the MEV supply chain. They can decide which RPC they send to, or basically which entity they expose the user's transaction information towards. And then there's the RPC layer. Basically, they can decide, oh, I'll broadcast these transactions towards a public mempool or like a private mempool. And then there is searcher. who are basically like monitoring the public mempool. Potentially, some of them also have access to private mempool, who are basically trying to look at figure out like if there is any opportunity for them to insert a transaction before or after, or like before and after, which means they are trying to sandwiching the user transactions, and then submit this total how to say, let's say 3 transactions as a bundle to the builder the next. And so the builders who are receiving all these bundles are basically doing the job to prepare the block for the validator to settle for the next block. The builders, they are basically accessing public mempool. So one element or a factor that's important for them is to have a really good connectivity towards like a broader coverage of public mempool with lowest latency. And then also they would want today, like the competition among the most competitive builders definitely also require private mempool access. Like for example, Flashbots builder, because we have a pretty good adopted how to say an RPC product called Flashbots Protect. We have a good amount of like private mempool transactions, but those would by nature mostly are retail user transactions, which means they leak or they contain less MEV compared to searcher transactions. We also receive searcher transactions, but we're not doing searching ourselves. And in contrast, some other most competitive builder are like basically centralized exchange trading firms. For example, like rsync and Beaver, they're like pretty big like searcher builder, meaning they have their own arbitrage flow coming from centralized exchange as well, which are much more MEV valuable for the builder, or I would say like their own builders. Those are what the builders do today. And then going down the MEV supply chain, there's also a very important role called the relay. They don't really have access to any value, or they're not getting any money or profits today by doing their job, but they're doing a very important job. They're basically validating the block that builder passed to them to submit for a validator to pick. They're gonna like simulate and make sure that like the whole block will not like have any syntax issue, and then they will expose these blocks to validators to call a function called getHeader. So basically, relay also has a important topic here, which is latency. Today there are like 5 top relays: ultrasound, Gnosis, and Bloxroute, and Flashbots. There used to also be like block native, but they stopped the relay because as they said, they cannot really maintain the the cost for running the relay without any profit. Then that relay passed it to validators, and in PBS or POS, validators can be a big staking pool like Lido or Rocket Pool or Coinbase staking. It could also be a solo staker like myself, which basically is it's gonna be like one person running a very simple machine at our home, staking 32 ETH. That would be the overview of MEV supply chain.
Okay, thank you so much. So for a user transaction to be included on chain, it usually needs to go through 2 competitive auctions, right? At the searcher level and the builder level. Although from my understanding, both the searchers and builders grow to be more and more sophisticated and professional, they are not on an equal footing, as searchers don't have much control over whether their bundles could be included on chain, while builders are much more privileged. They have this last look ability to cancel a bid or reorder. So I want to dive deeply into the dynamics between searchers and builders. Danning, can you tell us some of the complexities?
Yeah, I think like the thing you said is definitely right. And that's exactly why some searcher or biggest searchers, they want to become a builder as well. And today we saw the 2 biggest searcher builder is rsync and Beaver, who basically they have so big impact from their flow, where it wouldn't make sense for them to submit to any other builders. And trying to bribe the builder to include their transactions. There's definitely some difference between search and builder in terms of what they do. So you will have to you need the capacity or like resources as like a big enough team to really become a builder as well as a searcher. A lot of the very smart searchers, they today still just do searching independently because like being a builder is not a trivia thing. Some people would say like today builders merging algorithm is pretty naive still, but one example like Titan, they're a pretty sophisticated builder. They had a lot of optimization in terms of how they build the block and everything. So I would say, yeah, in general, definitely builder is in a more privileged position to include the transaction as a like finality wise. But then some big searcher, they have like a really big stake in terms of the MEV value they bring in. While also these searchers, they would tend to become a builder. And the rest of the searchers who are basically more like independent searcher, including like Jared from Subway, they're just sending to all the builders. An interesting thing we see is that some searcher, if they're competing also, for example, on the CeFi flow, they would avoid the CeFi builders. There's like a website called searcherbuilder.pix that was really interesting, where you can see the vertical integrated searcher builder, their searcher flow, or when you tag their on-chain arbitrage bots by contract addresses, you can see their flow are all going to their own builder. But another interesting thing to see is that like some other searcher, they send to every builder, but not the top two who are competing on the same flow with them. So yeah, it's interesting. Another new thing we've noticed recently is like when we talk about vertical integration, we were mostly thinking about like the example of like the CeFi-DeFi searcher builder. But back in, I would say November, when we were in Istanbul, there were new discussion coming up where mostly from some development from Titan Builder, they're accepting some searcher flow to be inserted at the end of the block, to potentially allow like atomic searching, meaning they could also background potentially the transactions in the block they prepare, and potentially they themselves is also doing some searching at the end of the block. Being in the end of the block is a promise to not to mess up the users' prices that they receive, which makes sense. But also, I think it's smart and a new movement, which means there's also atomic searcher builder integration coming up.
Okay, that's quite informative. And next, I want to talk about order flow auctions, which has been a buzzword in the MEV landscape, and we can see many innovations coming out. I just had an interview with Anna from CowSwap, which I believe is a very good example of OFAs. And this time, I would like Danning to give a general introduction of OFAs and their landscape.
So actually, I have this mind map where if we think about the MEV supply chain diagram that we just talked about, from user, wallet, searcher, builder, validator, if we put order flow auction in the picture, it's basically, I would call it like a searcher builder separation, by design. Basically, where you can imagine like when users submitting a transaction to their wallet, and the wallet now can use the RPC from a order flow auction, for example, like CowSwap or Flashbots Protect, or blocks routes background.me or some other stuff. And at this point, the order flow auction, basically us, will expose the information you want to expose to a set of searchers, and we can call them bidder maybe, because they will submit the background transaction they can come up with, and also the highest refunds they can give out as a total. And usually the order flow auction, they will split the refunds by the user's setting. In MEV Share, the default is 90%. So 90% to user and 10% to validator. The platform doesn't really take anything. And note that this total is like whatever the amount that searcher give out. It's not like the total searcher profits. And then so at this point, order flow auction will try to compare what's the highest refunds for user. And then correcting myself, order flow auction will simulate all the refund transactions they received from backgrounders or searchers or bidders. And then whenever it's like successful, they will forward it to builder. That's what we do today. Like the order flow auction doesn't really select what's the highest refunds. They just forward everything to builder, and the builder will pick what's the highest based on their simulation when they're trying to construct the block. There's definitely a lot of the, I would say, competitive background could fail because of the conflicts with some other transactions in the block. So it's hard to say like if the order flow auction is the most effective in terms of like getting the highest refunds for user. It depends on a lot of things, and it depends on like builders, algorithm, and etc. So it's also a quite interesting behavior where user are multiplexing always usually towards multiple order flow auctions. I think like it's a intuitive thing to do, because you would think like when you're trying to make a DEX trade, you would understand that DEX aggregator would give you a better price than just going to like a pure DEX. Like basically 1inch or 0x supposedly would give you a better price than Uniswap, because they're comparing Uniswap and many other AMM and give you a better price, like the best price out of all the prices they compare. But I don't think that's the case for the order flow auction. Like aggregation theory doesn't really make sense here, because different order flow auction, they have different setting for privacy feature. For example, CowSwap's MEV Blocker, they actually broadcast the whole transaction, like the whole information towards all the searchers. While Flashbots MEV Share is more like a very privacy first designed order flow auction, where user can tune the parameters they want to expose in their transaction, including like if you don't tune anything, by default, you're just exposing your transaction hash and a special event log, meaning we might tell the searcher this is a Uniswap swap, but they don't necessarily even know what's the direction. They might know the Uniswap contract, meaning they will know the pair of assets. They don't know what exactly the amount the user is trading. They don't know what's the direction they're trading. So they will have to like probably blindly guess what's the profitable strategy for them. You could also turn on all your information. You can say, I'm sharing all the transactions information, like call, for example, like call data, like event logs, like contract addresses and everything. This is actually, how to say, in our flow, we see half of our transaction are shared with CowSwap's flow. So meaning like half of Flashbots, how to say, MEV Share or protect users, which is also half of CowSwap MEV Blocker user, because we roughly have the same scale of user order flow. By number, it's around like 5% of Ethereum transactions every day, around like 30-50K range that we're receiving from users. So half of these volume, how to say, order flow are multiplexed, meaning half of this user, they're sending both to MEV Blocker and MEV Share. But then the problem comes in that when you share to MEV Share, you have some like privacy setting, but then the searcher, once they see your transaction hash here, they'd be like, I don't really know the information here, but let me check CowSwap's endpoint. And then they see, oh, okay, so the full information for this transaction is this. So you're totally like breaking the privacy setting, like harming yourself by sending your transaction to both places. Another issue is that, for example, like let's say we like CowSwap's searchers found a background and Flashbots MEV Share searchers didn't find a background, and both OFA would forward the user's single transaction to builder as well for landing the transaction. And Flashbots OFA said, okay, there's no background. I'm gonna forward this user transaction to builder directly and send it on chain. And CowSwap's searcher said, CowSwap said, okay, there is a bundle for this user transaction. Let me forward this bundle to builder. But then when the builder is trying to simulate the bundle, it says bundle failed because user's transaction is already on chain, landed by other builder. So that's another problem. Like basically, you're also harming yourself by sending to multiple places, and then you will not really maximizing the refunds they're actually getting. If does that make sense?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I guess my question is, why would the users send their bundles to both to MEV Blocker and the Flashbots MEV Share?
Yeah, I think like naturally you would think if I'm sending to more places, there are more searchers, and so the more competitive searcher would probably win, and I'll get the highest. But if the two OFAs is not talking to each other, meaning they're not aggregating, in the same place, it doesn't really make sense to think like that. And I think some users may don't really care what's the highest refunds they can receive. They will be like, I'm just using OFA endpoint as a builder endpoint, meaning I'm just trying to land my transaction. If there's any refund, that's good. So I think these users are potentially either didn't understand or they're trying to maximizing for inclusion speed.
Okay. So can you share some interesting findings about the changes that the OFA has brought to the order flow or the MEV landscape?
Yeah, I think in general, when different protocols trying to design OFA, the goal is to bring some MEV back to user. So basically trying to redistribute the user that's the MEV that's originated by the user back to user. And I think like MEV Blocker so far has been doing like the best job. If we're talking about that aspect, I believe by now, by the time we're recording, they've landed around like 810 ETH total, which is around like a 10x number compared to MEV Share. I'm not afraid to say. This is also by the nature of privacy setting. It's a trade-off between the efficiency of MEV extraction versus your privacy setting. So what we saw so far is that when we compare MEV Blocker and MEV Share, we have pretty much the same base volume. And I would say MEV Blocker has a bit more searchers than MEV Share because of the privacy nature. Builders would think, it's not going to be profitable for us to search on MEV Share. So it was a harder job to onboard more searchers for MEV Share. MEV Blocker has, I believe, SCP, which is one of the biggest searcher and one of the biggest MEV trading firm that is running a simulation on top of MEV Blocker transactions. And on top of that, landing the transactions also, and MEV Share has a higher revert rate because the searcher cannot see the information. A lot of time they're just spamming blind background by different sides of the sample, and a lot of them could fail because they cannot see the transactions. So with all these things together, we're landing around, I would say, like 10% of final number in terms of like around like 70, 80 ETH total. Besides MEV Blocker and MEV Share, I haven't seen other data, but there are Calibrio, Blink, and also SMG from Consensus. Both are running or designing in early phase about OFA. And I believe as of today, there is pretty good adoption from the dApp side. Like for example, I would say like the coverage of all the DEX swaps using OFA is pretty high. MEV Blocker has all the flow coming from CalSwap, and then Uniswap, I'm not sure. Because if it's Uniswap normal transaction, user has to be the person submitting a transaction. If it's Uniswap X, I believe it's a filler. They can decide where they can submit the transaction. I haven't seen fillers talking. I have in the data where I'm looking at if the transactions are going through private mempool, public mempool. Uniswap X seems to going still to public mempool, but then 1inch Fusion actually is going to fully going to private mempool as well. ZeroX also has a meta transaction module from Matcha that they are testing with, I believe, Blink and SMG. So yeah, wherever the DEX swaps can be submitted by the entity of the DApp team, or like say, yeah, by an entity, it's being pretty much submitted to private mempool, except some Uniswap X transactions. And for the transaction that's submitted by user, I'm seeing like around like 15% of transactions are being sent overall on Ethereum. And if we're talking about by volume, over 50% are sent. So meaning user are using order flow auctions.
Okay, so can you tell us what are these implications of more and more transactions are going through this private order flow or private RPC?
Yeah, I think that was a prediction from Hasu a while ago. He said like the public mempool will dry up. It might be a little bit clickbaiting, but it's definitely becoming true. In the beginning of this year, we had a number where we're looking at the private mempool percentage by transaction count per builder, for top builders. It was around 3 to 5%. And the number from the last quarter this year is around 15% and higher for the top 5 builders. And so we definitely are seeing this private mempool numbers going up. And it's probably also gonna, imply that the builders' competition for acquiring private mempool transactions will be more and more, aggressive. And to break it down a little bit, the private mempool order flow also has, like different types of, in terms of the MEV value they carry. So when I said earlier that like Flashbots private mempool transaction is lower MEV, it's because it's basically user transactions submitted to us, with the MEV being just the gas fees pretty much. It does have all MEV leakable value if we expose it to searcher, but it will be much less than directly the searcher flow. So yeah, the second higher MEV value flow would be like searcher flow or atomic searcher flow. I would say, out of that MEV value, 99% are sent towards validators. So you could pretty much think like the atomic searchers MEV flow today will be fully, sent towards validator, which is added in the bid value. And beyond that, I would say like the higher MEV value order flow would be like searcher from CeFi. I would say like CeFi-DeFi searcher flow. As a higher one.
Okay, as you mentioned the CeFi-DeFi searcher builder flow, this is a heated topic in the MEV community. According to some data analysis, that arbitrages represent a significant portion of the arbitrage opportunity on Ethereum. And in the Twitter space hosted by Eigenfi a few days ago, to which Danning, you were a guest as well, for the question for what are the most surprising or unexpected things that happened in the MEV supply chain since the merge, the guest almost gave a uniform answer, which is the CeFi-DeFi searcher builder integration. But as I remember, when TBS was put forward, centralization on the block builders layer was foreseeable, as block building requires significant infrastructure and professions. So my question is, how is the current CeFi-DeFi searcher builder integration different from the imagined centralization back then? And what makes CeFi-DeFi searcher builder integration possible with hindsight? So Danny, maybe you can start with explaining what is CeFi-DeFi searcher builder integration.
Yeah, to the first question, I believe the centralization force back then when people talked about, or people envisioned, is more of like the aspect of saying there are, say, only top 2 or top 3 builder that's like very powerful in terms of being very good at like merging the bundles and creating competitive blocks. I don't think there people have thought about their searcher builder separation, how to say integration, in the centralization sense. But it makes so much sense now once we see this happening. And to explain what is CeFi-DeFi searcher builder integration, it means that if there is a searcher who are basically doing CeFi-DeFi arbitrage, meaning they are monitoring the transactions on the CeFi, say like Binance or Coinbase, and they see that the price is moving towards a certain direction. They're usually like very sophisticated like CeFi traders. They because of the latency difference, CeFi is like milliseconds, very high frequency, but like Ethereum will have like 12-second delay. And so between this 12-second delay, there's a lot of like price being stale on DEX trades, or how to say on DEX pool, on DEXs. And this difference of the price on DEX versus the price on CeFi will create a huge arbitrage opportunity for them to try to clean up the prices. Basically, say if the assets is going up, but the DeFi price was still very much lower, then they can basically sell high and buy low on another place. And this kind of flow has really high profits, and hence they can give out a lot more profits to validators, which means this transaction can leak higher MEV value. When we talk about MEV value, it's basically gas fee plus the transfer you want to give out to validator. And so here, the DeFi CeFi arbitrage flow usually will have like a much bigger margin to give out the profits for validator. And these searchers, they want to make sure they can adjust their trades at very last second or very last millisecond. They would want to get as close as possible to the builder because they want to finalize the transactions at the, say, very last 10 milliseconds before the block lands. And so they started to build the builder infra. And starting from like this year around March, we starting to see like Beaver and rsync both come in with a very powerful builder. They basically rsync is Wintermute as the trading firm. Beaver is SCP, and they are forwarding their own CeFi-DeFi arbitrage flow towards their own builder. And those builders quickly become really high on the rank in terms of the block inclusion percentage out of all Ethereum. They were producing around like 20-30% very quickly. And at some point, like SCP, who is one of them, was producing like say 40% of blocks per day across all Ethereum blocks, which was really bad in terms of like centralizing force. So I think like people thought about the centralization of say a top builder become very powerful and potentially, like if they are producing that amount of block and say they can just censor all the transaction. Let's say they're producing 40% of block with nothing in the block, then that's basically saying Ethereum is not usable and there is no transaction being processed, 40% of the time, which is bad. That would be searcher builder integration.
Actually, this situation kind of reminds me of the MEV Utopia versus MEV Dystopia concept brought up by Stephen. You kind of mentioned it in the beginning of this interview. In that article, he lists a set of opposite characteristics of MEV in the future. I would like to name a few here for reference. For example, for competitive edge, the Utopia version is creativity. The dystopia is capital, exclusive access, and license. For value accrual, the Utopia version is users and network, and the dystopia version is bots and miners. And in terms of bot operations, the Utopia version is individuals, while the dystopia version is billion-dollar funds. So I want to get your take on this issue. Are we really heading towards the dystopia trajectory?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think dystopia is the main, I would say the bigger problem we're seeing today. I definitely see there's also efforts moving towards utopia, where order flow auction is one example where we're trying to still like really distribute some refunds to user and to potentially not expose those transactions to those searchers directly. Although this is conflicting, I guess, like because SCP is also searching on MEV Blocker. So I guess there are some effort to trying to still give some value back to some other players, but the main problem today, or that's like so obvious, is that the dystopia is happening. That a few players, they're like mafia basically. They're getting access to MEV at each layer. How to say, down the stack. Like for example, if we're talking about SCP as an example, right? Or basically just like one biggest trading firm as an example, you starting with user go to a DEX aggregator, and when they're getting a quote, they're either trading on AMM or RFQ or order. And when they're quoting, when they're getting a quote from RFQ, SCP or some other biggest market maker, Wintermute as well, they're giving a quote, they're taking the user's order potentially if they're having a better price than AMM. Cool, they get the access at the first layer, at DApp layer. If they didn't get the order will settle with the AMM liquidity, will go down to the stream, say the mempool layer. And at this point, either you go to public mempool where those searchers can again monitor these transactions and try to attack it with their MEV bots. So that's another access. And say the user is smarter and they send their transaction towards a private mempool. Again, they are the searcher on top of the OFA. Then they gotta add a background and then submit the bundle to builder. This is slightly better because user get potentially some refunds. But again, these same people getting the third access the third time, and then those bundle go to their builder. It's the fourth time they're touching the user's flow. It's very dystopian, yes.
Okay, so the situation is more concerning than most of us have imagined, I guess. So that's why we need to call for more builders to join the force of fighting this crisis. So in the following section, I'd like to talk about what the MEV community have built so far and what should be built in the future. So I guess listeners are quite familiar with the metaphor of Ethereum as dark forest, as there has been these sophisticated arbitragers take away value from users in an unnoticeable fashion. That's why one of the most significant contribution of Flashbots was to illuminate the state of MEV in Ethereum. So after years of research, Danny, can you share with us what makes observability and transparency so difficult in MEV mitigation, and what progress have been made so far?
Yeah, why it is so hard? Because I would say, using like say two examples. If we're talking about like trying to account MEV activities, there's so many protocols that you need to account. You need to update your methodology all the time when there's a new protocol comes in and there's new MEV happening. And usually it's based on some heuristic saying, oh, there is a transaction before it and after there's same trade but two direction, and potentially that would be a sandwiching. And so this kind of heuristic can be, not accurate all the time. So it's pretty hard. In the beginning, Flashbots had a tool called MEV Inspect. That was a pretty good setting standard kind of tool as of its first one. But it's being out of, it hasn't been maintained for a while. So it stopped around June this year. Zero MEV, I believe, was using MEV Inspect underlyingly as the data source, which was another good website where you can look at the transaction per transaction level, or also summary level. We are also actually giving grants for people to maintain MEV Inspect, and a recent new tool came out was from libEVM called libmev. So the person is called libEVM, but they have this website called libmev, libmev.com/dashboard, which was like a really good, and I believe like quality was also very good, how to say, is the tool to account MEV activities that's happening. There's also EigenFi. They've been doing the data for a while. They also have this really good tool called EigenTX. So where basically you can throw 3 transactions in and see how the bots or users are being attacked by MEV, etc. But yeah, in terms of another example, for example, like PBS data is another open source data Flashbots is publishing in the past year and a half, after the merge, where we're trying to account the realized MEV for user by a realized MEV for Ethereum by accounting the total revenue from validators. But there's also, potentially issues where, let's say, the builder is setting it's hard to account like sometimes the builder's profitability based on this data set. For example, sometimes because if the builder decides to take no profits, they just set the validator's address as the recipient. That's fine. But sometimes if it's like a searcher builder vertical integration, it's really hard to also account the searcher profits because if they just forward the refund to their own builder, sometimes the searcher doesn't even add the transfer in the transaction because the builder address can just subsidize themselves, but actually it's from the searcher profits, if that makes sense. It's a little bit complicated. But yeah, there's a lot of like behavior that can disturb or mess up the accountabilities of these data. But I think a lot of the data that are pretty good is coming out. There is one series of websites called .pix from a Ethereum Foundation researcher called Tony. He's been publishing these websites called MEV Dystopia, which I believe a lot of people go there and check out the market share from builders, relay, and validators. He also been publishing censorship.pix and tornado.pix, which are mostly focusing on the topics of if the Ethereum transactions are being censored by looking at, for example, tornado as an example. There is a misconcept about this topic where people would think usually the relay is the one to blame about censoring transactions. Certainly they do. But the bigger concern actually is the builders. They actually have the first access to just throw out the tornado transactions directly. And also they can censor transactions from, say, someone else is competing on the same flow with them. They can then just throw those out and censoring and forward their own transactions. Yeah, there's another website called mempool.pix from the same person. He basically used the block native mempool dataset to account how much transactions are coming through private mempool today, how are the percentage breakdown by different builders are. Flashbots had another data tool called mempool dumpster, which is aggregating 5 data sources from different node providers, including Bloxroute, Eden, Infura, and a few others. So we're publishing this data as well, like every day to a website where you can just click download the CSV. We're also forwarding this data to Dune Analytics, where anyone who can write SQL, they can also query these data and join those with Ethereum data sets. So yeah, I think this space in terms of trying to bring in the transparency for MEV is still evolving, and the quality is still it's like it's not accurate, but it's improving all the time. And there's a lot of tools that's pretty good today. Yes. There are some still dark corners, I would say, that's missing data. For example, everything we talked about is more like the later stack of the supply chain. But if you think about it, like go upstream towards closer to the user, there's not many information off-chain where you can know, oh, what's the market share of different wallets? Certainly, we know that MetaMask is very high, but we don't really know like where they are forwarding their flow to which RPC, and what about other wallets, and what about other dapps that's submitting transaction for users. So yeah, I think those can be can be better, but it's off-chain data, so it will really depend on those teams to publish data set. There's another thing would be interesting, which was a concern, which is the builder to publish more data about what the bundle they receive at what timestamp, and if those were landed, or if those didn't land because of simulation error, or just because the waiting time delay and user submitted another transaction, etc. Because today people have some, how to say, skeptics about what builders are doing, especially if you're searching as well. Like, for example, Titan got questioned a lot, I think, around the DevConnect time, where some MEV Blocker transactions was seeing a background coming from a searcher, but not their own searcher with a refound. So they were like, did you guys replace the refound and just the background our user transaction yourself so you can keep all the profits? And I think, like, I don't think the builders are doing it, but it could be very helpful if they release some data API where you can query what's the status, what was the tracing for all the bundles. So that would be my rant.
Okay, that's quite informative and helpful. I wonder, do you have any suggestion for the best practice for users to protect themselves from MEV attacks?
Yeah, I would say in general, if you are making a DEX trade, basically if you are exposing MEV or you are leaking MEV, the first thing you do is definitely not to send your transaction to public mempool. You would either want to say, let's say you don't care about refunds, you just want, it's a very time sensitive transaction, then you want to maximize your inclusion speed. Then the smart thing to do would be sending all your transactions to the builder endpoint, which I think Block Native has a pretty good product, which is like RPC aggregator. If you want to also, if you care about the pricing and you want to get some refunds, you should use a and you don't care about privacy in terms of, like, as long as I trust the platform, I don't care what information I send. MEV Blocker probably has a better efficiency in terms of extracting MEV. But in this case, you don't care about privacy. You can probably send to multiple OFA RPC endpoints. If you do care about privacy and you're like, I want to send my transaction exclusively, I don't want it to be exposed without me knowing who is looking at my transactions, and I only want to expose my transaction hash to people who are potentially searching on me, then you should use MEV Share. So it really depends on what's the preference from user, what's the intent from user. But there's many options. But I would say in general, you should definitely use anything that's like MEV aware, so like private mempool products.
Okay, I would definitely put all the websites you just mentioned to our show notes. And here it comes to the last question to this interview, which is, what can we expect from Flashbots that will help MEV mitigation and transparency improvement in a near future?
Yeah, so we constantly doing things to improve the transparency. Some smaller things or items is that I think once we're publishing this, it's probably released. So in next 1 or 2 weeks, we're publishing a website called orderflow.art, where we mapped out all the transaction lifecycle steps for Ethereum DEX trades for users. So for retail user. So me and my teammate Angela, we started with student queries where we're looking at if the transactions are non-toxic, meaning it came from a front-end contract or like front-end router, like say you traded on Uniswap's front-end or Matcha front-end or even like a Telegram bot, or say it's from a wallet swap from MetaMask swap. We will include those transactions and we check which DEX platform did you use by labeling the router. And we also check what's the liquidity source those platform matched for your order and show those liquidity sources. Sometimes it's also RFQ from market makers, and we label those market makers with their name as long as we have labels. And then we also check if the transaction went through a private or public mempool. And then we check if it's through a OFA by either MEV Blocker or Flashbots Protect. And then we check where did it go to the builder, like which builder took the order. So users can basically put their transaction hash into the website and check how did your transaction went through the whole statement, I'll say the whole Ethereum settlement layer from the whole MEV supply chain. So we're also coming out with a blog post where we're analyzing a lot of this microstructure in the market. Another two pieces that's being developed by our product team is refund API and status API. So refund API is more of for retail user to check your refunds that went through MEV Share, and status API is for searchers to check how is the status of your bundles when you submit it to Flashbots Builder. So these can potentially bring a lot of transparency or basically clarity for our users. And here by user, we mean either retail user and also searcher as a user. We're also open sourcing MEV Share and Protect data with clickable downloads, and also in June for anyone who want to analyze it next year. And I would say the bigger item that you can expect from Flashbots for helping this is the Suave development. And I'm pretty happy and very excited that I'm seeing there's a lot of progress being made internally. There's a very clear roadmap now with the testnet and public launch for the Suave chain. In maybe a quick introduction for Suave is that it's basically I would say the way I understand it is that we have a bunch of researchers and engineers. They're designing this mechanism, or basically a platform, or you could think it as a chain where you can basically put everything that you're doing, which is a auction, into the chain in a decentralized way, or I would say that's not run by a person or a centralized server. So basically, for example, if we're decentralizing block building, basically it means the application team, they would forward the order flow towards a Suave endpoint, and all the builders, supposedly, ideally, who are building blocks today on Ethereum, they will have their own deployed contracts that is running their merging algorithm, and they're receiving those those order flow through endpoint, and they are including those order flow, running their algorithm, and potentially output a optimal block off the chain. So everything basically is standardized into a code base, rather than say the team can do anything that's shady behind it, if that makes sense.
Okay. We really look forward for the new releases from Flashbots. I guess that's all my questions. Thank you so much, Danny. You did illuminate the dark forest to me, and I hope so will the audience. And that's all for today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.